acceptance. Maybe a little part of it comes from the fact that they are writing in English. That in itself helps towards, at least traveling towards, some sort of Western acceptance. I think everyone knows the people who are on our panel. Manu Joseph, he's a journalist and writer, currently writing for New York Times as well. His first novel was The Serious Men in 2010. It also got the Hindu Literary Award. His recent novel is The Illicit Happiness of the People. Prajwal, of course, first was a short story collection called The Gurkha's Daughter, and the more recent one, released only in December 2013, I think, was Land Where I Flee. I'm going to just throw the topic off to Manu first. Manu, do you, your characters are very Indian in names, but do you modulate your writing for some sort of Western acceptance?
I don't know if you met an Indian writer who admits to it, but honestly, my problem is that I don't write even for an audience. I mean, I hope that I have readers, but the process of writing is, at least I find it so difficult. It's such a difficult thing to do that the last thing you want to do is to complicate it by trying to be dishonest about what you want to write. But at the same time, as an Indian writer and as someone from the South, there is a natural process of interpretation. I can write about Madras. I can write 800 words about Madras, and if you are from the North, you will not understand anything unless I have interpreted it in such a way that everybody understands what I'm talking about. So there is a process of interpretation which is there anyway, But yes, there could be, after the novel is over, and if the novel is sold to the West, there could be some elements which naturally those publishers will not understand, and then you make a decision whether you want to keep that line or not. Like, for example, if I want to say some second-rate American intellectual who has watched Sholay and he thinks he can debate India, let's say, it's a real character though. Now a British publisher may not know what's going on, like what's Sholay, and also for my New York Times columns, there are a lot of things I can't say because the audience is not going to understand what I'm talking about. And also there is a question of it can get very untidy when you try to interpret a bit too much. At least in my column, for example, in my letter from India column in the New York Times, if I want to mention Sonia Gandhi, I have to think very deeply because I just can't say Sonia Gandhi. I can't even say Congress President. I have to say the President of the Indian National Congress, Sonia Gandhi. I have to invest 10 words if I decide to mention Sonia Gandhi. So yes, at least in my journalistic writing, there is a kind of modulation which is just necessary, and in fact that has given me a lot of discipline, but as far as the novel is concerned, I find it so difficult to write in the first place that I think it would be extremely onerous to think of anything else.
That's right.
Hi, I started my writing career with a book titled The Gurkha's Daughter. This happens to be the American cover of the book, which is very, very different from the Indian cover. You will see the Indian cover in the bookstore. It's the image of a cute little Gurkha girl and not a sari-clad woman who may or may not have much to do with the stories in the book. And the book is called The Gurkha's Daughter. The title was chosen with the specific intent of tugging at the heartstrings of people in the United Kingdom. because the Gurkha soldiers have been serving Her Majesty's regiment for so long that there is a great deal of fondness for them in the UK. Now, was that some kind of pandering? Was that some kind of modulation? I think so. The American edition of The Gurkha's Daughter has a glossary in the back which explains every Nepali word used in the book. And in fact, I even went as far as to write an author's note that explains what the Gurkha's Daughter is, because no one in America knows what a Gurkha is. It's not the same as it is in the UK. Was that pandering? Maybe. Did I modulate myself slightly? Perhaps. But when it comes to the crux of the book, when it comes to the content of the book, I'm not going to compromise on my integrity there. Will I incorporate a white American character into the book for the simple purpose of using him as a window for my Western reader to access the South Asian market? No, I'm not going to do that. But there are some other things that I've done. There are some other things that all of us do, I think. The American edition of the book contextualizes a few words and phrases in a far different way that the Indian edition does. So, yeah, I've done that. I think we all do that, yeah.
Actually, the covers are quite interesting. For my first book, when I saw the UK cover, I didn't know how to react because there was an elephant. And so I thought, okay, one character, Arvind Acharya, I had referred to him as an elephant because he's a large person, so maybe there is something in this. It's also a dwarf sitting on the elephant, so I try not to think too much about the dwarf, but that was also probably from some scene. Then when I saw the US edition, it had Shiva and Ganesha and a mouse. So I was like, okay. But what is interesting was that some of the readers who didn't like the book, they ended up saying, I picked up the book because of the cover, and I was so disappointed by the book. So I was very glad that the publisher knew what she was doing.
You know what? I realized that too. When I first circulated the UK cover of my first book on Facebook, there were all these people in India who wrote the nastiest messages to me saying, your book is doing exactly what it's not supposed to do. It's exoticizing India, a sari-clad woman who almost looks like she's fingering herself. I mean, what the hell? And it's such a male gaze on a woman's body because her head has been cut off. But for whatever reason, it seems to be the kind of book that pops out at bookstores in the UK or the US or in Africa. And I'm fine with that. So I think publishers know what they're doing. And I would rather not waste hours and hours talking a publisher out of designing a certain kind of cover, because these guys have been doing it for years and years and years, whereas I am a 3-year-old author. Again, would it be the same for the content of the book? Yes, I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to, I want the content of the book to be reflective of what I've written. But things like covers, the way they market us, my publishers love marketing me as a Nepali-speaking writer. Why? Because there haven't been many of us in the West. Oh, for the first time in the UK is a Nepali-speaking writer writing about this world. And I'm okay with that. Fine, it's okay. I mean, you are not really fabricating anything here. I am a Nepali-speaking writer. If that's going to help me land a review in The Guardian, okay. I can live with that, but I mean, don't make me write 7 pages about the Nepali hat because I don't want to. If I want to, I'll write. Otherwise, I won't.
But, sorry, I keep interrupting your questions. So don't forget your questions.
Yeah.
It's crucial. No. I'm wanted to say things and you're like, you don't want to use the question. But there is a grim... There is a grim fact, actually, and I've been thinking about it after 2 novels and after reading or appearing to read some of the novels by Indians which are sold in the West, which are not many, actually. in any given year, there are only 2 or 3 Indian novels, if I'm not mistaken, which are sold in the West. Now, if your story is a very Indian story, and it's completely rooted in the sense that there are moments and nuances which only a resident of India would fully understand or would be interested in, there is a good possibility that the Western publishers, and because the Western audiences would reject it, would also reject such a book. It is not a coincidence that a lot of so-called Indian books have been written by Western Indians who have lived in the West, or somewhat westernized Indians, which would include many of us. I have a favorite analogy for this. NASA has been looking for water in space on various planets. Now they are searching for water because the theory is that only water can support life. Now that is a very anthropomorphic way of looking at life in the universe. So we are not searching for aliens, we are searching for human beings, but who would have some kind of cute tentacles and would be green. In fact, sometimes I think Americans are searching for Americans in space who look a bit different. So I feel that sometimes Western publishers also are looking for the West in the Orient, but set in a slightly exotic setting, but the language has to be still comprehensible to their audience. Now you take Murakami. In fact, I was at a writers' conference a few years ago, and the translator of Murakami said something very interesting. He said, Haruki Murakami is not a Japanese writer, He's probably an American writer who writes in Japanese, because he is so Western in his thinking, and everybody can understand, even we can understand them, because those books are westernized. And I tell you, it is not corrupt. It is not a literary corruption at all. It is just that, there is a certain global uniformity in a particular kind of people today. The kind of people meet in Goa, Bombay, Delhi, New York, Tokyo, they're all the same. They have the same set of values, the same ways in which they look at the world. So the novel is beginning to reflect this uniformity. And I'm not someone who's a traditionalist. I feel that things change, and that's how it is. It's fine. I don't think we are culturally impoverished because of that.
Like earlier you mentioned in particular about Sholay and the fact that probably an American audience or a Londoner won't know about that movie.
Or a Malayali.
Or a Malayali. Exactly.
I watched Sholay when I was 33. When I was 33 because I was forced to.
Yeah. So, but a lot of times when we read books that come from West, we don't know everything. A lot of time, even a tiny chapel in the middle of a small street in Rome is mentioned, and we go back and take the effort of figuring out what it is, because it is so inherent, even though it's those just 2 lines in the book, but they are so inherent to taking the story forward. Do Indian writers somewhere lose that and try to become, I'm not talking about the journalistic writing, writing for New York Times about India is a completely different thing, but do writers somewhere here in India actually lose that essence somewhere, sometimes trying so hard to try and make their story get to the Western audience?
See, the choice is entirely up to you. As you rightly said, as readers, we are trained to work hard to understand something in a book. Because we were never the cultural superpower. We always were open to books from various cultures, and there were many things we didn't understand, and we would try to understand. So maybe that habit would influence you when you're writing. You're automatically trying to work hard to explain, because you know that this might. But then it's entirely up to you, because these are not the things which are going to work against a book when a Western audience is trying to judge your book. It is the larger picture, it is the whole, it is the authenticity, when a story is authentic to its culture, it begins to appear somewhat incomprehensible to someone who's completely removed from the culture, But at the same time, in fact, I have suffered more from familiarity. I can tell you that there's a major distinction in the reaction to a particular aspect of my first novel, Serious Men, from Western audiences and the Indian audiences, where I was the book was accused of being somewhat not too Indian. It was, I was introduced to the concept of male gaze from Indian critics when they were talking about Serious Men, and I found it very amusing, because this is a man, and there is a way in which men would look at the world, and women. And I was just very naively and honestly portraying everything that I knew as a man who grew up in Madras, Kerala, Bombay, to represent a certain view. But the Western audience seemed to be a bit mature about that. They would it is offensive, but it's all right. That's how this guy's a jerk, probably, that's all right, But there was a greater emotional engagement in India, and because they were very familiar with, they knew what the author was talking about. And when Iron Money, the character who's actually from a chawl, is looking at refined, highly educated, smart, westernized Indian women, and when he's saying, what's your problem? I'm the one who's the underdog. I never had the opportunities. You had all the opportunities. That's something I've heard many times from a particular segment of the society. And the Indian women who read Iron Money's observation were completely disgusted with him, that he could. But at the same, it's like, on the one hand, people talk about subaltern. I think only Indians use the word subaltern anymore, At the same time, people expect a certain highly refined upper class sensibility in any character, which is just absurd to me, So the engagement changes, and sometimes you are just relieved that it is a person who's not from your culture who's reacting to the book.
It's something I struggle with greatly. In fact, I struggled with it a lot when I was writing The Gurkha's Daughter. I was writing for the first time. I had no clue who my reader would be. I had no clue if the book would ever see the light of day, because in the West, you first write a book before a book deal comes your way. And for the longest time, I was wondering if I was over-explaining something, and I was nervous that would alienate my Indian reader. If I didn't over-contextualize something, I was afraid that would alienate my Western reader. And then I said to myself, screw this. If I continue thinking, if I continue writing with a particular reader in mind, then my writing is just going to be this highly watered-down version of whatever it is that I sought to say. And just as what you said earlier, I think you should just concentrate on getting the story out and not worry too much about who the reader is, because then, things can get messy.
You also, in your books, talk about your own life experiences. I read that you said that when I told people I was from Nepal, they asked me if I had climbed Mount Everest.
I'm not from Nepal. When I told people I was of Nepalese origin, my mom is from Nepal. I'm Indian. Carry on.
Yeah, and people were asking you, have you climbed the Mount Everest?
Oh my God!
That
all
happens
over
all
America.
the time.
Yeah.
So do you find these kind of stereotypes that exist all over the world about Indians or about Nepalis or about different cultures? somewhere do you try to keep away from them in your books? Do you consciously try to not include those things in your book?
You know what? I don't think about it at all. Land Where I Flee, my novel, I have been very, very proudly saying is a book that thrives on stereotypes. The characters in the book, a high-caste Brahmin woman who gets married to a so-called low-caste refugee, a closeted homosexual doctor, Indian doctor living in New York, a eunuch character, a grandma who is 84 years old and is sari-clad, etc., etc. I realized midway when I was writing the novel that this book was so full of stereotypes that I needed a fourth character, a fourth sibling, who was a writer who could poke fun of novels like that, poke fun of stereotypes like that. So do I, and there's also this entire thing, Manu, I'm sure you get this. If you portray something too close to reality, you get accused of stereotyping. And if you portray something that's slightly removed from reality, you get accused of being inauthentic. So there's no winning at all. It's either one or the other. So you just say screw it and write. No, I'm not mindful of propagating stereotypes when I'm writing. I mean, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. I mean, you see the bathrooms in, wet bathrooms in India. You go to many Indian houses and the showers wet the entire bathroom, and I've seen them everywhere, and I like writing about that. It's a stereotype, yes, but it's a stereotype for a reason.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel stereotypes are much maligned. I think most of the time generalizations are closer to the truth, and many times they're versions of the truth, and people who have problems with generalization, sometimes I think they've taken the bribes from exceptions, It's like, what is this obsession with exceptions that you have a problem with generalization? Most of the time we understand the world through generalizations, and to be prejudiced is a fundamental right sometimes. So we'll go crazy if you want to put every situation and try to understand it without a background, a set of background indicators, and that's what generalization is.
At any given point in time, anyone wants to ask a question can just go ahead. Starting from Manu, because we are talking about Asian voices and Western audiences, do you want to be recognized more at home or more abroad?
Well, that's a very tricky question, actually. See, first of all, if I'm recognized, I'm okay with that. No matter from where, I don't make those distinctions. But what annoys me is that the Indian audience appears to recognize a certain hierarchy. For example, if you say shortlisted for the Booker, or you won the Booker, they tend to put you in a particular orbit, which is absolutely unnecessary, because most of the time your books might have probably sold better and even fared better. But there is, and it's such a powerful, it's such a huge brand. So I would think I would like my fellow men and women to look at Indian books the way only they can, instead of waiting for signals from the West. So it's become much better than it was probably 10 years ago, So just that. Otherwise, as far as when recognition comes, I'm okay with that. As long as people want to read my book, I don't care where. I'm just grateful, because I distinctly remember the time when I was struggling with my book and then struggling to find a publisher. I was rejected many times, and it looked like it will never be published. So it's hell. To be a failed writer is hell, actually. Yeah.
Just a while back, talking about generalization and the fact that the Indian audience respects something like being nominated for a Man Booker, etc., is also generalization. So I don't see your...
No, because it's the truth. Most generalizations are the truth.
As the truth.
So, I mean, if you have a problem with the second generalization, I find it contradicting what you said about generalization.
No, I feel the generalizations are usually closer to the truth.
Okay. Sure. Okay, fine.
Yeah, talking about that generalization, I came to the Indian market the Western way. I was first signed by a publisher in the UK, only after which I came to the Indian market. Now, what happened when I signed my book deal was the Indian media went berserk for no reason at all. They hadn't read a word of what I'd written. There was no story of mine online at all, but they went crazy. They started treating me like the new Gandhi. And, they called me the harbinger of the resurgence of the short story when they hadn't read a word of what I'd written. And to get to your question about where I want to be recognized more, I mean, I want to be read all over the world. I don't want to compromise my writing, but I want to be read everywhere. But I have a special fondness for the West because because it was the recognition in the West that made things so much easier in India. There was no way in hell I would have gotten the press I received, the adulation I got, had it not been, had I been, say, published by Penguin India and not by, someone in the UK and the US. So, for convenience's sake, yeah, I mean, a recognition in the West would be wonderful because that would spill over and come to India.
And what about just the fact that you both write in English? Does that also influence the fact that, obviously, when you're writing in English, if you're writing about India or any other country, there's the texture of the language is missing. So the storytelling will definitely be more anglicized, if I could say so, and that automatically also changes your audience.
Yes and no. Manu, you were talking about dialogue earlier, at a session earlier today. I find that a lot of my dialogue takes place in Nepali in my head, and I employ a kind of literal translation to English, which is my way of keeping the Nepali Kadidas intact there. I also pepper my speech with a lot of Nepali words, for which I've gotten some praise and some criticism, but that doesn't really change. Change my narrative. It doesn't change the bottom line of the story. I mean, I have come across people who say, "Oh, hey, there were 3 words at the end of the cleft, and I thought that was a little oddly placed, but I understood the story. It didn't change anything." So yeah, I